I watched my own family smile as the lawyer announced I'd been cut out of my father's will. My younger brother leaned back in his chair like he just won the lottery. My aunt actually whispered, "Well, that's what happens." I remember staring at the table, trying to convince myself I'd heard it wrong. I hadn't. They thought the story ended there. They thought they'd beaten me. What none of them knew was that my father had planned for their greed long before he took his last breath. And when the truth finally came out, it didn't just change who inherited his estate, it destroyed every lie my family had spent years building. Before I tell you what happened, do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this story with someone who still believes the truth always finds its way home. Because after what happened to me, I believe that more than ever. My name is Preston. I grew up in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. Nothing fancy. Tree-lined streets, Friday night football, neighbors who still waved when they drove past your house. My father, Warren, owned a small woodworking shop. He wasn't rich, not even close, but everyone respected him because if he promised something, he'd deliver. He built dining tables that stayed in families for generations, cabinets, rocking chairs, porch swings. He always said, "A man's reputation weighs more than his wallet." Back then, I believed everyone in our family lived by the same idea. I was wrong. My younger brother, Landon, was different from me in almost every way. He knew exactly what people wanted to hear. He remembered birthdays, complimented everyone, showed up just long enough to be seen, then disappeared the second actual work started. Funny thing was, everyone loved him for it. If Thanksgiving dinner needed cooking, I was in the kitchen. If Dad needed help repairing the roof, I was already climbing the ladder. If Mom needed someone to drive her to appointments before she passed away, it was always me. But when relatives talked about their favorite nephew, somehow it was always Landon. For years, I kept asking myself what I was doing wrong. Maybe I wasn't outgoing enough. Maybe I didn't smile enough. Maybe I should have learned how to impress people instead of simply helping them. Dad noticed. He never said much in front of everyone, but sometimes after family dinners, we'd sit on his old porch with 2 cups of coffee. He'd look toward the trees and quietly say, "Some people chase applause." Then he'd look at me. "Others earn respect." I never forgot those words. After Mom passed away, everything changed. Dad seemed smaller somehow. The strongest man I'd ever known suddenly moved slower. His laugh wasn't as loud. His workshop became quieter. I started stopping by almost every day after work, not because anyone asked me to, because I couldn't stand the thought of him eating dinner alone. We'd order burgers, watch baseball,
argue over which pickup truck was built better. Normal father and son stuff. Looking back, those evenings became the best memories of my life. Then came the diagnosis: heart failure. The doctor didn't sugarcoat it. Medication would help, lifestyle changes might buy some time, but eventually his heart would lose the fight. I still remember sitting in that hospital room pretending to be strong. Dad looked over at me and actually laughed. "Son, you look worse than I do." I laughed too, mostly because I didn't want him seeing me cry. After that day, life became a routine. Work, hospital, pharmacy, grocery store, Dad's house. Repeat. Every single day. Landon, well, he always had an excuse. "I've got meetings. I promised friends I'd be there. I'll visit next weekend." Next weekend rarely came. The strange part, whenever relatives visited Dad, Landon somehow managed to show up 20 minutes before they arrived. He'd hug Dad, ask how he was feeling, bring expensive pastries, stay exactly long enough for everyone to watch him being the perfect son. Then, the second the driveway emptied, "So, you good?" Dad would nod. Landon grabbed his keys. "Call me if you need anything." Then he'd leave. Dad would look toward the front door, wait until Landon's truck disappeared, then quietly shake his head. One evening, while I was organizing his medications, he asked something that caught me off guard. "Preston, if people thought you had nothing left to give them, who do you think would stay?" I shrugged. "I don't know." He smiled. "I do." That answer stayed with me for weeks. As his health declined, I started helping with his finances. Nothing complicated, paying utility bills, making sure prescriptions were covered, organizing paperwork. He hated chaos. He'd always joke, "If I can't find something in under 30 seconds, I've failed." One afternoon, I noticed Landon standing in Dad's office. He quickly closed a filing cabinet when I walked in. "Oh," he smiled, "just looking for old family photos." Something felt off. I couldn't explain it. The cabinet contained financial documents, insurance records, and property deeds, not photo albums. Still, I let it go. Maybe I was imagining things. Weeks passed. Dad became weaker. Walking across the living room left him breathless. Some nights I'd sleep in the guest room because I worried he'd need help. Those nights became conversations I'd treasure forever. He talked about meeting Mom, about struggling to start the woodworking shop, about the first table he'd ever sold. Then, one night, his voice became unusually serious. "Promise me something. Anything. No matter what happens after I'm gone, don't stop looking for the truth." I frowned. What truth? He stared towards the ceiling for several seconds, then simply smiled. "You'll know." Wait, what did that even mean? I wanted to ask more. Instead, he changed the subject, started talking about baseball again.
I assumed the medication had made him tired. I wish I'd pressed harder. About a month later, he collapsed inside the workshop. The ambulance arrived within minutes. I rode with him, held his hand the entire drive. His grip was weak, barely there. He looked at me once, managed the smallest smile, then whispered, "I'm proud of you." Those were the last words my father ever spoke to me. At the funeral, people lined up to tell me what a wonderful man he'd been. Some cried, some hugged me, some shared stories I'd never heard before. It was comforting, until I noticed something. Clusters, little circles of relatives whispering. Not about Dad, about his house, his land, his savings, his workshop. I overheard my aunt say, "I wonder what the property's worth now." Another cousin answered, "Probably close to 7 figures with today's market." I couldn't believe it. Dad hadn't been gone for less than 2 hours, and somehow, money had already become the loudest voice in the room. I looked across the cemetery and saw Landon laughing quietly with our aunt. When he noticed me watching, his smile disappeared. He gave me a small nod, then turned away. Something tightened in my chest. I couldn't explain why, but for the first time, I had the unmistakable feeling that my father's warning was about to make sense. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following Tuesday. It took place in a quiet law office downtown. Nothing fancy. Gray carpet, oak conference table, a coffee machine humming in the corner. The kind of place where people signed papers that changed their lives. I got there 15 minutes early, mostly because I couldn't stand sitting at home. Landon showed up 5 minutes later, wearing an expensive navy suit I'd never seen before. Perfect haircut, designer watch,
bright smile. If you didn't know him, you'd think he was grieving with dignity. Behind him came Aunt Judith. Then my cousins, Brent and Elise. They walked in talking about vacation plans. Vacation plans. Dad hadn't been buried a full week. I should have seen it then. Maybe I did. Maybe I just didn't want to believe it. Mr. Halbrook, Dad's attorney for nearly 20 years, walked in carrying a thick leather folder. He looked exhausted. His eyes met mine for a second. There was something strange about the way he looked at me. Almost concern. He cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming." Nobody spoke. He opened the folder, adjusted his glasses, then started reading. Most of it was exactly what I'd expected. Personal belongings, small donations to Dad's church, a contribution to the local veterans organization. Then he reached the section about the estate. My heart started beating faster, not because I cared about the money, because this was Dad's final message, his last decision. I wanted to hear his voice through those words.
Mr. Halbrook looked down. The residence, adjoining workshop, investment accounts, savings, vehicles, and all remaining assets shall transfer solely to my son. He paused. Landon. Silence. Complete silence. I blinked. Wait, what? Maybe I'd heard the wrong name. I looked around the room. No one else looked confused. Landon slowly leaned back in his chair. A smile crept across his face. Not a surprised smile, a satisfied one, like he'd been expecting those exact words. Mr. Halbrook continued, "My son Preston shall receive my personal toolbox." That was it. The toolbox. Nothing else. No explanation, no letter, nothing. The room stayed quiet for another few seconds. Then Aunt Judith let out the smallest little laugh. "I suppose your father knew best." Brent shrugged. "Guess that settles it." I couldn't breathe. Not because I'd lost money, because none of it made sense. This was the same father who couldn't stop thanking me for helping him. The same man who trusted me with every bill, every appointment, every medication. He left me a toolbox. I looked toward Mr. Halbrook. There has to be some mistake. He avoided my eyes. "I'm sorry, Preston. I'm reading the most recent document on file." Most recent. Those words echoed inside my head. Most recent. Landon finally spoke. "I know this must be hard." His voice sounded almost sympathetic. Almost. Then he smiled. But Dad made his choice. There it was. That smile. Not sadness. Victory. Something inside me cracked. "You barely visited him." The room froze. Landon slowly turned toward me. "I had responsibilities. You had excuses." His smile disappeared. "I don't need to defend myself." "No, you showed up when people were watching. I was there every day. I slept in that house. I took him to appointments. I paid his bills. I changed bandages. You came around long enough to take pictures." Aunt Judith slammed her hand on the table. "That's enough." I looked at her. "No, it isn't." She stood. "Your father clearly saw through you." Those words hit harder than I expected. Saw through me? I felt my chest tightening. You think I helped him because I wanted money? Brent folded his arms. Isn't that exactly what this sounds like? Oh no. Was that really how they saw me? Years of helping, years of showing up, reduced to one accusation: greed. Landon sighed dramatically. I didn't want this. He looked around the room. But maybe Dad realized who actually respected him. I stared at him. You don't even believe that. His jaw tightened. You should leave. I will, but look me in the eye and tell me you visited him more than 5 times during his last 6 months. Nothing. He said nothing, because he couldn't. Aunt Judith suddenly stepped between us. You've embarrassed yourself enough. I tried to step around her. She shoved my shoulder, hard. The room went completely still. I looked down at the spot she'd pushed.
Then back at her. You just put your hands on me. So what? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So what? I laughed, not because anything was funny, because sometimes your brain doesn't know what else to do. Then, without warning, she slapped me. Hard. The sound echoed across the conference room. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. Even Mr. Halbrook looked stunned. My cheek burned. I slowly raised my hand and touched it. I looked around the room. Not one person asked if I was okay. Not one. Brent looked away. Elise stared at the table. Landon actually shook his head like I was the problem. I picked up my jacket. No shouting, no threats, no dramatic speech, just disappointment. The deepest disappointment I'd ever felt. As I reached the door, Landon called after me. You know, if Dad wanted you for more, he would have left you more. I stopped walking. For 1 second, I almost turned around. Instead, I kept going, because nothing I could have said would have mattered. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. I climbed into my old pickup, closed the door, and just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, not moving, not thinking, just existing. After a minute, the tears came, real ones, the kind you can't stop. Had I imagined everything? Did Dad secretly resent me? Had every late-night conversation meant nothing? Was everyone right? Maybe I'd built a version of my father that never existed. I hated myself for even thinking it. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel. Then, something came back to me. His voice, clear as day. Don't stop looking for the truth. Those words again. Truth? Why would he say that? Truth about what? I started the truck, drove home, barely remembering the drive. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I went back to work, people offered condolences, life moved forward. Mine didn't. Every evening I'd come home to silence. No more phone calls from Dad asking if I could grab milk. No more baseball games together. No more coffee on the porch. Just silence. Then about 3 weeks later, I got a call from the county office. A polite woman explained that Dad's workshop needed to be emptied before ownership officially transferred. Since I still had a key, would I mind gathering any personal items? I almost said no. Then I remembered. His toolbox, the only thing he'd left me. Maybe I should at least pick it up. The next morning, I unlocked the workshop. The familiar smell hit me instantly. Fresh cut oak, sawdust, linseed oil. For a second, it felt like Dad was still there. His reading glasses still rested on the workbench. His favorite coffee mug sat beside an old radio. Everything exactly as he'd left it. I walked over to the toolbox, not knowing. That opening, it would uncover the first crack in the lie my family had worked so hard to protect. I stood there for a long moment with my hand resting on the old red toolbox. It wasn't worth much. The paint was chipped. One of the latches had been replaced years ago with a simple brass clasp because Dad said, if something still works, why throw it away? I smiled, without meaning to. That sounded exactly like him. I carried the toolbox onto his workbench and flipped the latch open. Inside were the tools I'd expected: a tape measure with faded numbers, his favorite wood chisels, a square, a small block plane polished smooth from decades of use. I carefully lifted each one out, not because I was looking for anything, just because I couldn't bring myself to throw his life into boxes. As I reached the bottom, I noticed something odd. The tray inside didn't sit flat anymore. I pressed one corner. Nothing. Then I tried the other side. It shifted, just a little. Wait, I'd used this toolbox hundreds of times growing up. I didn't remember it having a false bottom. I slid my pocket knife underneath the wooden panel. It lifted. Only about an inch, but that was enough. My heart skipped. Beneath it sat a large manila envelope. My name was written across the front. Preston. Dad's handwriting, no question. I'd recognize it anywhere. My hands started shaking. I looked around the empty workshop like someone might suddenly walk in. The room was silent. Only the old wall clock kept ticking. I slowly opened the envelope. Inside were three things: a handwritten letter, a sealed legal document, and a flash drive. I unfolded the letter first. The first line nearly took the air out of my lungs. If you're reading this, then they found the other will first. I stopped, read it again, then again. My pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it. I kept reading. Son, if everything happened the way I feared it would, you're probably questioning whether I loved you. My eyes filled instantly. Don't. Not for 1 second. I sat down in Dad's chair, the same chair where he'd balanced invoices for years. His words felt like he was sitting across from me. You were the son who showed up when nobody was watching. You never asked me for anything. That's exactly why I trusted you. A tear landed on the paper. I wiped it away before it could smear the ink. Then I reached the next paragraph. Someone close to this family has been pressuring me about my estate for over a year. I froze. I changed it once because I wanted to see who was truly interested in me and who was interested in what I'd leave behind. I stared at the page. Changed it? On purpose? He continued. The document my attorney has should never become the final one.
The real will is enclosed. I looked at the folded legal papers. My hands almost refused to touch them. When I finally opened them, everything changed. This document was dated nearly 4 months after the one Mr. Halbrook had read. It carried Dad's signature, 2 witness signatures, a notary stamp. Every page was initialed. There was nothing incomplete about it. I skipped to the section that mattered. I leave my residence, workshop, investment accounts, savings, and all remaining assets to my son, Preston. I couldn't breathe. Not because of the money, because Dad hadn't abandoned me. He hadn't forgotten me. Everything I'd believed after that meeting, everything my family wanted me to believe, was a lie. I kept reading. Dad had also left several specific gifts to friends, charities, and church members. Everything was detailed. Everything made sense. Nothing like the version we'd heard in the attorney's office. Then I picked up the flash drive. A sticky note was attached. Only if necessary. I walked over to Dad's old computer. Somehow, it still turned on. I inserted the drive. There were folders, scanned bank records, emails, photos, copies of property documents, then a folder simply called Recordings. I clicked it. The first recording began with muffled voices. Dad wasn't speaking. Someone else was. Then I recognized the voice immediately. Landon. You don't need both of us on the will. Dad answered calmly.
I'm not discussing this again, Landon sighed. You know I can manage everything better than Preston. No, I've already made my decision. There was a long silence. Then Landon spoke again. His voice was colder now. If you don't change it, I can't promise this family stays together. My stomach dropped. Another recording. Aunt Judith, you owe Landon more. Dad replied, I don't owe anyone more. She snapped back. Preston's never given this family grandchildren. I actually laughed in disbelief. That was her argument? Dad's voice became firm. My estate isn't a reward for popularity. The recording ended. I sat there stunned. There were 8 more files. Every one of them told the same story. Pressure, manipulation, guilt. Dad never gave in. Then why? Why had the lawyer read the wrong will? The answer came from the last page of Dad's letter. I wasn't sure who could be trusted after I was gone. That's why I kept this copy where only you would think to look. If this reaches you, hire an attorney before speaking to anyone. Don't argue. Don't negotiate. Let the evidence speak. I folded the letter carefully. For the first time since Dad died, I felt steady. Not angry. Steady. There was a difference. The next morning, I met with an estate attorney named Calvin Rhodes. He spent nearly 2 hours reviewing every document. He barely spoke while reading. Finally, he leaned back. Where exactly did you get this? I found it where my father told me to look. He nodded slowly. This changes everything. Can they fight it? Oh,
He gave a short laugh. They'll try. He tapped the recordings. But these are going to make that very difficult. Within days, the probate court was notified. My family received formal notice that the estate was being challenged. The phone calls started almost immediately. Landon called first. I didn't answer. Then came the text messages. Can we talk? There's been a misunderstanding. Families shouldn't solve problems in court. Interesting. When I left that law office with nothing, family hadn't mattered much to him. Now it did. I still didn't respond. Aunt Judith left a voicemail. You're embarrassing everyone. Delete. Brent sent a message. Maybe we can work something out. Delete. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to keep the peace. Dad had been right. Let the evidence speak. The hearing arrived 6 weeks later. Landon walked into the courtroom looking confident until my attorney placed the second will on the evidence table. I watched the color drain from his face. He looked at Aunt Judith. She looked back at him. Neither of them spoke. The judge carefully reviewed the documents, then the witness affidavits, then the notary verification. Everything checked out. Then came the recordings. The courtroom was silent as Landon's own voice filled the room. You don't need both of us on the will. No one could explain it away. No one could say it was taken out of context. It was all there, minute after minute. Pressure, manipulation, threats. When the recordings ended, the judge removed his glasses. He looked directly at Landon. Do you dispute that this is your voice? Landon swallowed. Yes. And do you dispute the authenticity of the later will? His attorney quietly placed a hand on his arm. Landon looked down. Yes. That single word ended everything. The court recognized the second will as Dad's valid final testament. The earlier document was set aside. The judge also ordered that the matter be referred for further review because of serious questions surrounding the handling of the estate after Dad's death. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just closed my eyes. Dad had kept his promise. The truth had found me. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Apparently, a probate dispute involving allegations of manipulation had attracted local attention. Someone asked if I had a statement. I did. My father spent his life teaching me that integrity outlives money.
Today wasn't about winning, it was about honoring him. Then I walked away. Over the next year, life sorted itself out. Landon lost more than the inheritance. His business partnerships disappeared. People who once admired him stopped returning his calls. Trust, once broken, is expensive to earn back. Aunt Judith quietly moved to another state. Family reunions stopped happening. No one announced it. They simply ended. As for me, I kept the house. But the first thing I restored wasn't the living room, it was the workshop. Every Saturday morning, I unlocked those same old doors. I cleaned every tool.
Repaired every bench, hung Dad's favorite tape measure exactly where he'd always kept it. Then I started something I knew would have made him smile. A woodworking apprenticeship, free for local high school graduates who wanted to learn a trade. Not because it made money, because Dad believed skills should be passed on. Every student who walked through those doors learned the same sentence carved into a wooden plaque above the entrance. A man's reputation weighs more than his wallet. It still hangs there today. Sometimes I think about that afternoon in the lawyer's office, the laughter, the smirks, the slap. For a long time, I thought revenge meant making them feel the same pain they caused me. I was wrong. Real revenge was living a life that proved every lie they told about me was false. Money fades, houses get sold, cars rust, but character stays behind long after we're gone, just like my father knew it would. If this story meant something to you, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes that truth has a way of catching up with greed. And tell me in the comments, if you had found that second will, would you have gone to court or would you have walked away?